At the moment the coffin was closed, a wolf appeared among those present, leaving everyone speechless. With an agile leap, it jumped onto the millionaire in the coffin, and what it did next will leave you in shock. The lights of New York City shimmered like artificial stars from Ethan Morgan's penthouse. At 30 years old, he contemplated the metropolis from his glass terrace, holding a champagne flute that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Yet, the taste seemed strangely bitter tonight. "Ethan, the party's just getting started," shouted Valerie, his latest conquest, an international model he had met in Milan the week before. Her voice competed with the electronic music that made the penthouse walls vibrate. Ethan turned to observe the scene unfolding in his living room. More than 50 people, all dressed in the most exclusive brands, danced, drank, and laughed. Another party, identical to the hundreds he had organized in recent years, the same faces, the same superficial conversations, the same self-interested compliments. "Everything okay, bro?" asked Diego, his supposed best friend since college, approaching with 2 more glasses. "You seem lost in thought." "Everything's perfect," Ethan lied, forcing a smile. "Just needed a moment of fresh air." Diego patted him on the back. "Well, breathe quick because the investors from Singapore just arrived. Your father would be proud to see how you handle business and social life at the same time." The mention of his father made Ethan feel a pang in his chest. Frederick Morgan had built a business empire from scratch, but Ethan barely remembered spending time with him. His last words before his departure echoed in his mind. "There's more to life than money, son. Don't make my mistakes." A message on his phone interrupted his thoughts. It was from his mother, Eleanor. "Son, your grandmother Martha is asking about you. She says it's important. Please call us when you can." Ethan put the phone away without responding. His grandmother lived in a small town in the Appalachian Mountains, a place he hadn't visited since childhood. The memories of those summers were blurry but warm. The scent of medicinal herbs his grandmother cultivated, the stories about spirits and ancient traditions she told him before bed, the peace that permeated those mountains. "Ethan, the investors want to meet you." Valerie's voice yanked him from his memories. As he walked back to the party, a feeling of emptiness overwhelmed him. The laughter sounded hollow, the conversations insignificant. He observed the faces of his guests. They all wore invisible masks, playing roles in a meaningless play. In his private office, away from the noise, Ethan stopped in front of an old photograph, him as a child sitting next to his grandmother Martha on the porch of her house in the mountains. The smile on his childish face was genuine, his eyes shining with a joy he had lost somewhere along the way. The contrast between that image and his current reality hit him hard. At what point had he allowed his life to become this succession of empty events? Where had that boy gone? The one who dreamed of adventures in the mountains and believed in the magic of his grandmother's stories. The music continued to boom in the living room, but Ethan no longer heard it. His mind was far away in those mountains where his grandmother still kept ancient traditions alive. Perhaps it was time to seek answers in his roots, to find something real amidst so much artificiality. He took his phone and finally responded to his mother's message. "I'll travel to see Grandma tomorrow." The decision was made. As the party continued in his penthouse, Ethan Morgan began to plan his escape from the golden cage he had built for himself. What he didn't know was that this simple message would mark the beginning of a transformation that would change his life forever. The SUV moved slowly along the dirt road, winding through the Appalachian Mountains. Ethan observed the landscape through the window, so different from the skyline of skyscrapers he was accustomed to. The air became cleaner and fresher as they ascended, and the scent of pine and damp earth began to awaken dormant memories. "Are you sure you want me to leave you here, sir?" asked the driver, slowing down as he saw the first houses of Whispering Pines. "The nearest town with a hotel is 2 hours away." "Here is fine," Ethan replied, adjusting his designer jacket that now seemed ridiculously out of place. "My grandmother lives in this town." The driver nodded, though his expression showed some disbelief at seeing the contrast between the elegant businessman and the humble surroundings. Ethan took down his only suitcase. He had decided to travel light, leaving behind his branded wardrobe and all the symbols of his previous life. The first houses of the town appeared scattered among the vegetation, with their red tile roofs and whitewashed walls. Some older women, dressed in traditional quilted jackets, observed him curiously from their porches. A group of children stopped playing to stare at him, whispering among themselves. "Ethan, my boy." The familiar voice of his grandmother Martha resonated on the cobblestone street. The old woman appeared in the doorway of her house, with her characteristic blue shawl and a smile that lit up her wrinkled face. Ethan felt a lump in his throat at seeing his grandmother. She seemed smaller than he remembered, but her eyes retained the same wise and warm glow from his childhood. He approached her, letting her envelop him in a hug that smelled of aromatic herbs and firewood. "Grandma, it's been so long," Ethan murmured, surprised by the emotion that overwhelmed him. "Time is like the river, my child. It flows constantly, but always allows us to return to our source," Martha replied, with that enigmatic way of speaking that Ethan remembered from his childhood. "Come, your mother is preparing hot chocolate." As he entered the house, Ethan was hit by a wave of memories. Everything remained practically the same. The whitewashed walls decorated with traditional quilts, the family altar with its candles and flowers, the scent of sage that his grandmother always kept burning. Eleanor, his mother, was waiting for him in the kitchen. Her embrace was more restrained than his grandmother's, but equally emotional. "I'm glad you came, son. Your grandmother insisted it was the right time." "The right time for what?" Ethan asked, sitting at the old wooden table where he had eaten breakfast so many times as a child. Martha and Eleanor exchanged a significant look before his grandmother answered, "For you to find your path, my child. The mountain spirits have been talking to me about you." Ethan held back a skeptical smile. He had forgotten how his grandmother always mixed reality with the traditional beliefs of the region. However, something in her tone made him remain silent. "Things have changed in the town," Eleanor continued, while serving hot chocolate in earthenware mugs. "Don Joseph, the spiritual leader, has a lot of influence now, and not everyone looks kindly on the return of someone from the city." "Why not? I've only come to visit my family," Ethan protested. "Because you represent everything they fear," Martha replied softly. "The outside world, money, change. Don Joseph has been warning about threats to our traditions." Ethan took a sip of chocolate, allowing the familiar taste to comfort him. Through the window he could see the mountains surrounding the town, wrapped in a light mist. Suddenly he noticed that several villagers had gathered in the street, observing the house with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "Maybe I should have stayed in the city," Ethan murmured. "No," Martha said firmly, placing her wrinkled hand over her grandson's. "You are exactly where you need to be. The paths of the spirit are mysterious, but never wrong. Soon you will understand why you have been called to return." A cold wind slipped through the window, making the flames of the candles on the altar dance. Ethan felt an inexplicable shiver run down his spine. Something told him that his grandmother was right. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. Morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Ethan woke up in his old room, disoriented for a moment at not finding the usual panoramic views of his penthouse. Instead, a small window framed the majestic silhouette of the mountains, bathed in the light of dawn. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Eleanor greeted as Ethan entered the kitchen. "Your grandmother left early to collect herbs. She says you should accompany her tomorrow." Ethan nodded distractedly, pouring himself a cup of coffee. He felt strangely rested, as if the mountain air had cleansed years of accumulated weariness. "Martha, Martha!" an agitated voice interrupted the moment. A young woman, dressed in traditional clothes, hurriedly entered the kitchen. "Oh, excuse me. I didn't know you had visitors." "Rose, this is my son Ethan," Eleanor introduced. "Ethan, Rose is the granddaughter of Mrs. Carmen, the town healer." "My grandmother is very ill," Rose explained, tears in her eyes. "We need Martha's herbs. She's the only one who knows the exact mixture that helps my grandmother." "Mom is in the forest," Eleanor replied. "Ethan can accompany you to find her." Ethan was surprised by the suggestion, but something in Rose's desperation moved him. "Of course I'll go with you." As they walked along the path leading to the forest, Ethan noticed how the villagers observed them with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Rose walked quickly, explaining to him about the importance of her grandmother in the community. "Mrs. Carmen and your grandmother are the last ones who preserve the ancient knowledge," Rose explained. "Don Joseph says we should modernize, that we no longer need healers, but—" Her words were interrupted by an imposing figure that appeared on the path. Don Joseph, a man in his 60s, dressed in a mixture of modern and traditional clothing, looked at them sternly. "Rose," his voice was deep and authoritative, "what are you doing with the outsider?" "Don Joseph, my grandmother needs Martha's herbs," Rose replied, lowering her gaze. "The nearest hospital is 2 hours away," Don Joseph intervened, addressing Ethan. "There they'll find real medicine, not superstitions." Ethan felt an inexplicable irritation at the man's condescending tone. "My grandmother's traditions have helped this town for generations." "Ah, the city grandson defends customs he abandoned," Don Joseph replied with scorn. "How many years has it been since you visited your grandmother? 15, 20. Don't come now talking about traditions." Before Ethan could respond, a strange sound came from the forest. It was like an ancient chant, mixed with the wind through the trees. Rose instinctively crossed herself. "The forest spirits are restless," she murmured. "Martha says they can sense when there's conflict in the air." Don Joseph made a gesture of disgust. "More old wives' tales. Rose, take your grandmother to the hospital. And you, Ethan Morgan, should return to your world of glass and concrete. This place is no longer for you." As Don Joseph walked away, Ethan noticed that his hands were shaking slightly, not from fear but from an emotion he couldn't identify. The chant in the forest continued, softer now, almost like a whisper. "Do you really believe in all this?" he asked Rose. "The spirits, the medicinal herbs?" Rose looked at him with a mixture of compassion and wisdom that seemed beyond her years. "There are things that can't be explained with city logic, Ethan. Your grandmother knows that, and I think deep down you know it too." They continued their way in silence, entering the forest. The air became denser, filled with mysterious aromas and sounds. Ethan felt as if each step took him further from his previous life and deeper into a world he had forgotten, but that had somehow always been waiting for his return. Among the trees, Martha's figure suddenly appeared, as if she had emerged from nature itself. Her blue shawl waved in the wind, and her hands were full of fresh herbs. Upon seeing Ethan, she smiled with that ancestral knowledge she always seemed to possess. "I was waiting for you, my child," she said simply. "It's time for you to learn the secrets you've been seeking without knowing it." Dawn was barely beginning to tint the sky when Martha woke Ethan. "Get up, my child. The plants share their secrets only with the first ray of sun." Ethan sat up, surprised to have slept so deeply. The events of the previous day, the encounter with Don Joseph, the strange sounds of the forest, now seemed part of a distant dream. "Can't we wait until the sun comes up completely, Grandma?" he asked, putting on a light jacket. Martha smiled with that ancestral wisdom that seemed to emanate from each of her wrinkles. "The path of knowledge doesn't wait for our comfort. Besides, there's something you must see." They left the house in silence, crossing the deserted streets of the town. The cold morning air completely cleared the sleep from Ethan's mind. As they walked towards the forest, he noticed that his grandmother moved with surprising agility for her age, as if she knew every stone on the path. "Before entering the forest," Martha said, stopping, "you must ask permission." "Permission from whom?" Ethan asked, confused. "From the forest guardians, of course," she replied naturally, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Watch." Martha took out a small pouch from her shawl and sprinkled what appeared to be sage on the ground, forming a circle. Then she began to murmur words in a language Ethan didn't understand, but which sounded ancient and powerful. "Now you," Martha indicated, offering him the pouch. Ethan felt ridiculous at first, but something in the solemnity of the moment made him obey. As he scattered the sage, a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, producing a sound similar to what he had heard the day before. "The forest welcomes you," Martha smiled. "Come, there's much to learn." As they ventured deeper into the thickness, Martha began to point out different plants, explaining their properties and uses. To Ethan's surprise, he found himself fascinated by his grandmother's explanations. Each plant seemed to have a story, a purpose, a connection to the life of the town. "Do you see this flower?" Martha asked, pointing to a small purple flower. It only blooms once a year during the full moon. Its petals, properly prepared, can relieve nightmares and bring dreams of clarity. Like a natural sedative? Ethan asked, trying to find a scientific explanation. It's more than that, my child. Not everything can be explained with the logic of your world. Some things must be felt with the heart. As they advanced, Ethan noticed that his grandmother followed a specific pattern, as if she were following an invisible map. Suddenly, they arrived at a small clearing where the dawn light created golden patterns among the leaves. This is a sacred place, Martha explained. Here, the ancient healers have come for generations to collect herbs and communicate with the mountain spirits. Ethan observed the clearing with new eyes. There was something different in the air, an almost imperceptible vibration that made his skin tingle. Sit, Martha indicated, pointing to a flat rock in the center of the clearing. Close your eyes and listen. Ethan obeyed, feeling increasingly distant from his initial skepticism. The silence of the forest wasn't really silence. It was full of subtle sounds, whispers, barely perceptible movements. Suddenly, a louder sound startled him. Upon opening his eyes, he saw a deer at the edge of the clearing, observing them with curiosity. The animal held his gaze for what seemed like an eternity, before silently disappearing among the trees. Animals are messengers, Martha said softly. The deer represents gentleness and the ability to move between two worlds. It's an important sign. A sign of what? Ethan asked, surprised to find himself genuinely interested in the answer. That you'll have to discover for yourself, Martha replied, beginning to collect herbs with precise and ritual movements. Each one must find their own path in the sacred forest. As he watched his grandmother work, Ethan felt that something was beginning to change within him. The concerns of his life in the city, the meetings, the parties, the business, seemed increasingly distant and insignificant. "Grandma," he called softly, "how do you know which are the right herbs for each person?" Martha looked up from her work, her eyes shining with the knowledge of generations. "The plants speak to us, my child. We only need to learn to listen. And you're already beginning to hear their voices, although you don't know it yet." Evening was falling over the mountains when Ethan decided to venture alone into the forest. After a week of lessons with his grandmother, he felt a growing familiarity with the trails and a strange confidence in his ability to orient himself among the trees. The ritual of sage and ancient words now flowed naturally from his lips before each entry into the sacred forest. "Be careful," Eleanor had warned him when she saw him leave. "Twilight is the hour when the spirits are most restless." Ethan smiled at the warning. Although he still maintained some skepticism towards certain beliefs, he no longer dared to dismiss them completely. The past few days had been full of small, inexplicable events, mysterious lights between the trees, sounds that seemed to emerge from the earth itself, plants that seemed to respond to his presence. As he walked, he reflected on the changes he was beginning to notice in himself. The constant buzz of messages and emails on his phone no longer caused him anxiety. Concerns about the stock market and board meetings seemed to belong to another life, to another Ethan. A faint sound interrupted his thoughts. At first, he thought it was the wind through the leaves, but there was something more, something that sounded like a muffled whimper. He followed the sound, moving away from the main path until he reached a denser area of the forest. His heart almost stopped when he saw it, a young grey wolf trapped in a rusty trap. The animal, with silvery grey fur with reddish flashes, looked at him with a mixture of fear and dignity. Ethan remembered his grandmother's stories about wolves, considered spiritual messengers in ancient beliefs. "Easy," Ethan whispered, approaching slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf kept its gaze fixed on him, showing no aggression despite the evident pain caused by the trap on its paw. Ethan remembered his grandmother's teachings about how to approach forest animals, with respect, with an open heart, without fear but with caution. With gentle movements, Ethan took off his jacket and used it to partially cover the animal while trying to free its paw. The wolf surprisingly remained still, as if it understood Ethan's intentions. "This shouldn't be here," Ethan murmured as he examined the trap. "The forest is sacred." Working carefully, he managed to deactivate the rusty mechanism. The wolf's paw was injured but didn't seem broken. The animal, however, didn't immediately flee as Ethan expected. Instead, it stayed looking at him, panting softly. "You need attention," Ethan said, surprising himself by talking to the animal as if it could understand him. "My grandmother will know what to do." With infinite care and hoping he wasn't making a fatal mistake, Ethan took off his shirt and used it to improvise a bandage and a way to transport the wolf. To his amazement, the animal allowed itself to be manipulated, though it maintained a vigilant attitude. The way back to the town was slow and cautious. Ethan felt that every step was observed not only by the wolf, but by the forest itself. The evening shadows created mysterious shapes among the trees, and the wind seemed to whisper messages in a forgotten language. Upon reaching the first houses of the town, reactions were immediate. A woman screamed when she saw him. Another ran to close her door. The children playing in the street quickly dispersed. "Martha, Eleanor!" Ethan shouted as he approached his house. "I need help!" Martha appeared in the doorway and, to Ethan's surprise, showed no sign of alarm at seeing the wolf. Instead, an enigmatic smile drew on her wrinkled face. "Ah, the messenger has arrived," she said simply, as if she had been expecting this moment. "Quick, bring him inside. The forest spirits don't choose their protectors at random." As they entered the house, Ethan felt that something deep and irreversible had just occurred. The wolf's gaze, fixed on him with an almost human intelligence, seemed to confirm his grandmother's words. This encounter was not a coincidence, but the beginning of something much bigger that he was just beginning to understand. The news of the wolf spread through whispering pines like wildfire in dry prairie. By dawn the next day, a group of villagers had already gathered in front of Martha's house, their murmurs mixing with the crowing of early roosters. Ethan watched through the window as his grandmother applied a herbal poultice to the wolf's paw. The animal, which had spent the night in the kitchen on an improvised bed of old blankets, showed surprising docility under Martha's expert hands. "They've given you a name," Eleanor commented, serving herbal tea in earthenware cups. "The children in town are calling you the Wolf Whisperer." "More like the Wolf Lunatic," Ethan replied with a half-smile, though he could feel the tension in the air. "How's its wound, Grandma?" Martha was finishing securing the bandage with gentle but firm movements. "It will heal soon. The sacred plants and the forest spirits are on its side, and on yours too, my child." A loud knock on the door interrupted the moment. Don Joseph entered, without waiting for a response, followed by several men from the town. His presence filled the small kitchen with palpable tension. "Martha," his voice sounded controlled, but severe. "This has gone too far. A wolf is not a pet. It's a threat to the town." The wolf raised its head, its golden eyes fixed on the newcomers, but remained surprisingly calm. Ethan instinctively positioned himself between the animal and the visitors. "It's injured and needs help," Ethan argued. "Besides, grey wolves are protected by law. We can't simply—" "Now you care about our laws?" Don Joseph interrupted with disdain. "Or only the ones that suit you? This town has its own laws, its own traditions. The wolf has always been an omen of misfortune." "That's not true," Martha intervened, her voice soft but firm. "In our true traditions, the wolf is a sacred messenger, a spiritual guide. Our ancestors revered them as guardians of the forest." "Ancient times, Martha. The town needs progress, not superstitions or wild beasts." Rose, who had been observing from the door, stepped forward. "Don Joseph, my grandmother always says that when a wolf chooses a protector, it's a sign from the spirits." "Your grandmother is sick, child," Don Joseph replied harshly, "and soon she'll understand that modern medicine is more reliable than herbs and old wives' tales." The comment provoked a murmur of disapproval among some of those present. Ethan noticed that not all who accompanied Don Joseph seemed to share his hostility. "We'll give you 3 days," Don Joseph finally declared. 3 days to return that animal to the forest, or we'll take action. I won't allow the town's safety to be threatened by the whims of a city boy playing shaman." After the visitors left, a heavy silence fell over the kitchen. The wolf approached Ethan, limping, and rested its head against his leg in a gesture that seemed both comforting and loyal. "I can't abandon it," Ethan said, gently stroking the animal's silver fur. "Nor should you," Martha replied, beginning to prepare more medicinal herbs. "The paths of the spirit are mysterious but clear. This wolf has been sent for a reason. But what? Ethan asked, feeling that each day in the town brought more questions than answers. Martha smiled as she worked with her herbs. That, my child, is part of what you must discover. But remember, in our mountains, nothing happens by chance. Each encounter, each challenge is a lesson that the spirit presents to us. Eleanor observed the scene with concern. Don Joseph has a lot of influence in the town. This could bring problems. Problems, daughter, are like clouds on the mountain, Martha replied with her usual wisdom. They may seem threatening, but they also bring the rain we need to grow. Ethan looked out the window, where the villagers were beginning to disperse, some casting curious glances towards the house. The wolf stayed close to him, as if it had already decided that their destinies were intertwined. In the forest, the wind rustled the leaves of the trees, creating that mysterious sound that Ethan had begun to recognize as the voice of the mountain. Dawn found Ethan sitting on the porch of the house, contemplating the first lights of day filtered through the mountain mist. The wolf rested at his feet, its calm breathing mixing with the sounds of the awakening town. The wound on its paw was improving notably thanks to Martha's care, but something else was changing. The bond between them strengthened with each passing hour. The ancients said that when a wolf chooses a human, their spirits intertwine, Martha commented, appearing silently with 2 steaming cups of herbal tea. Like threads of the same fabric. Ethan took the cup his grandmother offered, allowing the familiar aroma to envelop him. There's something different, Grandma. Since I found the wolf, it's as if I could feel things I didn't perceive before. Martha nodded, as if she had been expecting this confession. The wolf is a bridge, my child, a bridge between the material world you knew and the spiritual world that has always been there, waiting for you to open your eyes. A group of children passed in front of the house, some hiding behind others at the sight of the wolf. However, a small girl stopped, looking at the animal with fascination instead of fear. The wolf raised its head, meeting her gaze with a serenity that seemed impossible in a wild beast. "Lily, get away from there!" a woman shouted, running to pull the girl away. But before leaving, the little girl smiled and waved. "Children see the truth more clearly," Martha commented. "Their hearts are not yet clouded by the fears and prejudices of adults." Ethan gently stroked the wolf's fur, noticing how the animal relaxed under his touch. How can Don Joseph not see that it poses no threat? Don Joseph sees what he fears to see, Martha replied. Fear clouds the vision of the spirit, but there are others in the town who are beginning to understand. As if to confirm her words, Rose appeared on the path, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. "Good morning, Mrs. Martha, Ethan. I bring some fresh meat for the wolf. My grandmother says it will need strength to heal completely." The wolf observed Rose with interest as she left the basket near it. Ethan noticed that the animal seemed capable of distinguishing between those who approached with good and bad intentions. "Your grandmother is wise," Martha smiled. "How is she?" "Better, thanks to your herbs," Rose replied. "And there's something else. Since the wolf arrived, the pains that afflicted her have diminished. She says its presence brings balance to the town." Ethan listened to the conversation while observing the wolf's behavior. The animal had begun to show patterns that seemed more than mere instincts. It became restless before storms arrived, reacted to people's emotions, and seemed especially protective of Martha and Eleanor. "Grandma," Ethan called softly, "why do I feel as if the wolf is trying to tell me something? Sometimes when I look into its eyes." "The eyes are the windows of the spirit," Martha interrupted. "And wolves have been messengers since ancient times. But to hear their message, you must first learn to listen with your heart, not your mind." Rose sat down with them, her presence now accepted by both Ethan and the wolf. "My grandmother says that in the old days, shamans could communicate with animal spirits, that they revealed secrets about healing and the balance of nature." "And they still can," Martha affirmed. "The ancient knowledge has not been lost. It's just dormant in those who have forgotten how to listen." A cool wind came down from the mountains, bringing with it the scent of the forest. The wolf suddenly stood up, its ears alert and its nose pointing towards the trees. Ethan felt a strange urgency, as if something or someone was calling them. "The forest calls," Martha murmured, observing the reaction of both. The spirits are restless. Something is changing in the mountain. Should we go? Ethan asked, surprised at how naturally the question arose, as if the forest was now an extension of his own being. Yes, Martha replied, her eyes shining with an ancient light. But first, there's something you must learn. The path of the spirit requires preparation. Tonight, when the moon is high, we will perform the connection ritual. It's time for you to fully awaken to your new destiny. The wolf approached Ethan, pressing its head against his hand in a gesture that seemed like confirmation. In the air floated a sense of expectation, as if the natural world held its breath for what was to come. The full moon illuminated the forest with an almost supernatural clarity when Martha led Ethan to the sacred clearing. The wolf followed them silently, its silver fur shimmering under the moonlight. Eleanor and Rose accompanied them, carrying baskets with herbs, candles, and sage. This place, Martha explained while preparing the space for the ritual, has witnessed sacred ceremonies for generations. Here, the veil between worlds becomes thinner. Ethan could feel it. There was something different in the air, a subtle vibration that made his skin tingle. The wolf also seemed to perceive it, staying closer to him than usual. The full moon is the perfect moment, Martha continued, while Rose and Eleanor placed candles at specific points, forming a perfect circle. It's when the spirits are most willing to communicate. The aroma of sage began to rise in spirals towards the starry sky. Martha took out from her shawl a small bundle wrapped in cloth, embroidered with ancient symbols. As she unwrapped it, she revealed a necklace of jade and obsidian beads. This necklace, Martha said solemnly, has belonged to our family for generations. It's only worn in moments of great spiritual importance. Ethan observed each preparation with a mixture of respect and anticipation. His former skepticism had given way to an openness that he himself didn't fully understand. The wolf sat beside him, as attentive as he was to each of Martha's movements. Before we begin, Martha warned, you must understand something important. Once the connection is established, there's no turning back. The path of the spirit is a lifelong commitment. I'm ready, Grandma, Ethan responded with a certainty that arose from the depths of his being. Martha nodded and began to chant in the ancient language of their ancestors. Her voice, surprisingly strong and clear, seemed to make the air itself vibrate. Eleanor and Rose joined the chant, creating a harmony that resonated among the trees. The wolf stood up and entered the circle of candles, sitting in front of Ethan. Its golden eyes reflected the flames, but there was something more in them, an ancient and profound intelligence. Kneel, Martha instructed Ethan, without interrupting the rhythm of the chant. Ethan obeyed, finding himself face to face with the wolf. Martha placed the ceremonial necklace around his neck while continuing to sing. The jade and obsidian felt cool against his skin. Now, Martha whispered, look directly into the wolf's eyes and don't look away. Ethan did so, and at that moment the world seemed to stop. The sounds of the forest faded away. The chanting became distant. Only he and those golden eyes existed, seemingly containing all the wisdom of the natural world. A strange sensation began to invade him, as if his consciousness was expanding beyond the limits of his body. He could feel the heartbeat of the earth beneath his knees, the whisper of the wind through the leaves as if it were a conversation. He was just beginning to understand. The wolf maintained its gaze fixed on him, and Ethan had the clear sensation that something was flowing between them, a connection that went beyond the physical. Images began to form in his mind, the forest seen from different perspectives, secret paths between the trees, sacred places hidden from human eyes. Suddenly, a distant sound broke the concentration of the moment. There were voices approaching, accompanied by artificial lights that disturbed the stillness of the forest. Don Joseph is coming with other men, Rose whispered, who had moved away to investigate. The wolf tensed but showed no aggression. Instead, it looked at Ethan as if waiting for a decision. To everyone's surprise, Ethan remained calm, as if the newly established connection had given him a new form of certainty. Don't fear, he said in a voice that sounded different, deeper, and more assured. The forest will protect us. Martha smiled upon hearing him, recognizing in his words the ancestral wisdom that was beginning to awaken in him. The ritual is complete, she declared. The spirits have accepted the union. A mist began to form around the clearing, thick and mysterious, as if the forest itself was responding to Ethan's words. The approaching voices and lights seemed to become confused, moving away in different directions. "The forest has spoken," Martha murmured, "and you, my child, have taken your first step on the path of the ancients. Now you are part of something greater than yourself." Ethan felt that something fundamental had changed within him. The connection with the wolf, with the forest, with the ancestral traditions was no longer something external. It had become part of his very essence. And with this change came the certainty that the true challenges were just beginning. The morning after the ritual, Ethan woke with a different awareness of the world around him. The sounds of the town reached his ears with a new clarity. He could distinguish distant conversations, the murmur of the wind through the trees, even the subtle movement of small animals in the nearby forest. The wolf lying next to his bed observed him with a complicity that went beyond the relationship between human and animal. "The gifts are awakening," Martha commented upon seeing him enter the kitchen, noticing how her grandson moved differently, more connected to his surroundings. "The ritual has opened doors that were closed in your spirit. It's as if everything were more alive," Ethan replied, accepting the cup of tea his grandmother offered him. "I can feel the pulse of the forest, people's emotions, even before seeing them." Eleanor observed her son with a mixture of pride and concern. Don Joseph and his men were searching for the sacred clearing for hours last night. The mist kept them going in circles until dawn. "The forest protects its own," Martha smiled. "And now you are part of it, Ethan." A commotion in the street interrupted the conversation. Rose came running, her normally serene face showing signs of agitation. "Ethan, Mrs. Martha, you have to come," she exclaimed breathlessly. "Some men from the city have arrived. They're in the main square with Don Joseph, talking about a tourism development project." Ethan and the wolf exchanged a look, as if both perceived the threat in those words. They headed towards the square, where a group of people had gathered around 3 men dressed in elegant suits that clashed with the town's environment. "As you can see," one of them explained, unfolding plans on an improvised table, "the tourist complex will respect the traditional architecture. It will bring prosperity to the town, jobs, modernity, and it will destroy the sacred forest," Ethan interrupted, his voice charged with an authority that surprised even himself. The wolf remained at his side, its presence causing murmurs among the crowd. The businessman turned, surprised by the interruption. Don Joseph smiled with disdain. "Ethan Morgan, shouldn't you be in the city, running your father's empire?" "I recognize those logos," Ethan continued, ignoring the provocation and pointing at the plans. "That's one of the subsidiaries of Morgan Group." A silence fell over the square. The businessmen exchanged uncomfortable glances. "That's right," replied the one who seemed to be the leader, regaining his composure. "In fact, we were hoping to count on your support for this project, Mr. Morgan, as the main shareholder." "Don't count on it," Ethan interrupted. The jade and obsidian necklace gleamed on his neck under the morning sun. "This forest is not for sale." Don Joseph stepped forward, his face hardened by anger. "It's not up to you, Ethan. The town council has already given its preliminary approval. Your recent connection with our traditions doesn't give you the right to interfere with progress." Ethan felt a wave of emotions coming from the crowd. Fear, hope, confusion, greed. His new sensitivity allowed him to perceive the true feelings behind the neutral expressions. "Progress?" Martha's voice rose among the crowd. "Do you call destroying our sacred forest progress? Polluting the waters that have sustained our town for generations?" "Times change, Martha," Don Joseph replied. "We can't live on traditions and superstitions forever." The wolf emitted a soft growl, its eyes fixed on the businessman. Ethan could feel its unease, its perception of the danger these plans posed to the natural balance of the place. "There's something you should know," Ethan said, his voice clear and firm. "As the main shareholder of Morgan Group, I have the authority to stop this project, and I will." The businessman paled. Don Joseph took a threatening step towards Ethan, but stopped upon seeing the wolf tense. "This isn't over," Don Joseph warned. "Progress is inevitable." "True progress," Ethan replied, "is finding the balance between the new and the old. And this forest, these traditions, are more valuable than any tourism development." As the crowd began to disperse, Ethan felt a deeper connection with the surrounding forest. Through his bond with the wolf, he could perceive the concern of the mountain spirits. This battle was far from over, but now he had the certainty that he was on the right path. Martha approached her grandson, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The spirits chose well," she murmured. "But remember, with power comes responsibility, and those who oppose the ancient ways will not give up easily." Ethan nodded, aware that he had just taken the first step in a struggle that would define not only his future, but the very fate of the sacred forest and its traditions. The weeks following the confrontation in the square transformed Whispering Pines. The town had divided into two factions: those who supported the tourism project, seduced by promises of economic prosperity, and those who remained faithful to ancestral traditions, fearful of losing the sacred connection with the forest. Ethan dedicated his early mornings to exploring the forest alongside the wolf, his senses increasingly attuned to nature's messages. Martha guided him in developing his spiritual gifts, teaching him to interpret the signs the forest revealed. "Close your eyes," Martha instructed during one of their lessons in the sacred clearing. "Let your spirit extend beyond your body. The wolf will be your guide." Ethan breathed deeply, feeling his consciousness expand. Through his connection with the wolf, he could perceive the invisible network of energy that connected everything in the forest: the ancient trees, the crystal-clear streams, the creatures that inhabited it. "Something is out of balance," Ethan murmured, frowning. "I can feel a disturbance." The wolf tensed, confirming his perception. Without opening his eyes, Ethan pointed eastward. "Over there. There are people in the sacred forest." Martha nodded with approval. "Your gifts grow stronger each day. Let's investigate." Following the wolf's guidance, they ventured deeper into the forest. Ethan could sense the presences more clearly now. 3 people moving stealthily among the trees. The wolf advanced silently, its silver fur blending with the forest shadows. They found the surveyors in a small clearing, taking measurements and marking trees with fluorescent ribbons. Ethan recognized one of them as part of the team that had presented the tourism project. "This is sacred territory," Ethan announced, his voice resonating with an authority that startled the intruders. The wolf remained at his side, its presence magnifying the effect of his words. The surveyors stepped back, surprised by the appearance. "Mr. Morgan," one of them stammered, "we're just doing our job. Don Joseph gave us authorization." "Don Joseph has no authority over the sacred forest," Martha intervened. "These lands belong to the spirits and to those who keep the ancient traditions alive." A strange breeze began to blow, rustling the leaves of the trees unnaturally. Ethan could feel the forest's energy responding to his presence, to his connection with the ancestral spirits. "I suggest you leave," Ethan said calmly. "And take a message to your employers. Any attempt at development on these lands will face not only legal opposition, but also forces you cannot comprehend." As if to emphasize his words, the wolf emitted a soft growl, and the breeze intensified, creating whirlwinds of leaves around the group. The surveyors needed no further persuasion. They hastily gathered their equipment and left, leaving behind the fluorescent ribbons. "The forest speaks through you," Martha observed, as Ethan removed the markers from the trees. "But remember, with each manifestation of power, the resistance of those who fear the ancient ways will grow." Ethan nodded, aware of the truth in his grandmother's words. Through his connection with the wolf, he could feel the forest's energy currents stabilizing again, but he also perceived a deeper unrest, as if the earth itself sensed the conflicts to come. "Grandma," Ethan called as they returned to town, "there's something else I need to learn, isn't there?" Martha smiled enigmatically. "The ancient healing rituals. You'll need them soon, though not in the way you imagine. The forest has shown me visions. Important changes are coming." The wolf suddenly stopped, its ears alert. Through their bond, Ethan perceived a new presence in the forest. Something different, more subtle than the previous disturbances. "Do you feel it?" Martha asked, observing their reaction. "Yes," Ethan replied. "It's like a call. Something or someone needs help." "The spirits have decided to test you," Martha explained. "Your training is about to enter a new phase. The gifts you've received are not just for protecting the forest from physical threats. but for maintaining the balance between all the worlds that touch in these sacred mountains. Ethan stroked the wolf's fur, feeling the energy that flowed between them. His transformation was far from complete, but each day he felt more connected to his true purpose, further from the man he had been in the city. The call that Ethan had perceived in the forest became clearer the next day when Rose came running to Martha's house at dawn. Her face showed a deep concern that Ethan could feel even before she spoke. "It's my grandmother," Rose exclaimed, her eyes filled with tears. "She's very ill. The fever won't break, and the doctor from the neighboring town says he can't do anything more for her." Martha exchanged a significant look with Ethan. "The spirits are never wrong," she murmured. "This is your first real test, my child." The wolf was already at the door, restless, as if it understood the urgency of the situation. Ethan felt a current of energy course through his body, the jade and obsidian necklace vibrating softly against his chest. "I'll need your help, Grandma," Ethan said as he collected the medicinal herbs Martha had been preparing. "I still don't fully master the healing rituals." "This time you must do it alone," Martha replied softly but firmly. "The spirits have chosen you. Trust your connection with them." As Ethan and the wolf followed Rose to Mrs. Carmen's house, the town was beginning to wake up. Some villagers observed them with curiosity, others with growing respect. Ethan's transformation had not gone unnoticed. The superficial young businessman had become something that many didn't fully understand, but which inspired a silent awe. Mrs. Carmen's house smelled of illness and the modern medicines that had proven ineffective. The old healer who had helped so many in the town now lay weak in her bed, her breathing irregular and her skin burning with fever. "Ethan," Mrs. Carmen whispered upon seeing him. Her eyes, clouded by fever, brightened with a recognition that went beyond the physical. "The spirits told me you would come." The wolf approached the bed, gently sniffing the air. Through his connection with the animal, Ethan could perceive the imbalance in the old woman's vital energy. It wasn't a common illness afflicting her, but something deeper, a disturbance in her spirit. "I need to prepare the space," Ethan said, with a certainty that arose from some ancient place within him. "Rose, please bring water from the sacred spring, the one that springs next to the oldest tree in the forest." As Rose hurried out, Ethan began to arrange the medicinal herbs in a specific pattern around the bed. The wolf moved with him, as if both were following an ancestral dance that their spirits remembered. "The balance is broken," Mrs. Carmen murmured between deliriums. "The forest suffers, and we with it." Ethan then understood that the old woman's illness was connected to something larger. Through his newly awakened sensitivity, he could feel how the imbalance in the sacred forest, caused by recent disturbances, was reflected in the healer's body and spirit. When Rose returned with the water, Ethan had already entered an altered state of consciousness. The jade and obsidian necklace glowed with an inner light, and the air in the room had become dense with ancient energy. "Stay back," he indicated to Rose and the others present. "The wolf will maintain the protection circle." Ethan began to chant in the ancient language, the words emerging from his ancestral memory as if he had always known them. As he sang, he mixed the herbs with the spring water, creating an infusion that glowed with a subtle light. The wolf moved around the bed, its presence creating an energy barrier that Ethan could clearly perceive. The connection between them had never been as strong as at that moment. With precise movements, Ethan applied the infusion to Mrs. Carmen's forehead, her heart, and her hands. The chanting intensified, and the room seemed to fill with invisible presences. Through his spiritual bond, he could see the unbalanced energies realigning, the old woman's spirit strengthening. "The sacred forest and its ancient guardians," Ethan intoned in English, "restore the balance, heal the spirit, strengthen the body." Mrs. Carmen breathed deeply, as if emerging from the depths. Color began to return to her cheeks, and the fever started to subside. The wolf emitted a soft howl that seemed to resonate with the energies of the ritual. "Healing is not just of the body," Ethan said, his voice sounding distant even to himself. "It is of the spirit, and of the sacred bond with the earth that sustains us." As the old healer sank into a peaceful and restorative sleep, Ethan felt the weight of a revelation. His gift of healing was intimately linked to the health of the forest itself. To maintain balance in the community, they must first protect the sacred lands that gave them life. The news of Mrs. Carmen's miraculous recovery spread through Whispering Pines like morning dew, covering every corner of the town with its presence. People gathered in small groups, whispering about the events of the previous night, about the ancestral chant some had heard, about the strange light that had emanated from the healer's house. Ethan rested on the porch of his grandmother's house, exhausted but at peace. The healing ritual had demanded more energy than he expected, but it had also revealed aspects of his gift that he was just beginning to understand. The wolf dozed at his feet, equally tired from the shared effort. "The town is changing," Eleanor commented, serving him a cup of revitalizing herbal tea. "I can feel it in the air, in the way people look at us now." Martha, who was weaving a new shawl with patterns that seemed to tell an ancient story, nodded. Ancient truths are awakening in their hearts, but with every light that is lit, the shadows also grow deeper. As if confirming her words, Rose appeared running down the cobblestone path, her face showing a mixture of joy and concern. "Ethan!" she called as she approached. "My grandmother is completely recovered. She says she needs to speak with you urgently. She's had a vision." Ethan sat up, feeling his strength return at the urgency of the call. The wolf also rose, instantly alert. In Mrs. Carmen's house, they found the old woman sitting in her favorite chair, surrounded by candles and sage. Her presence radiated a renewed strength, as if the near-death experience had strengthened her connection to the spiritual world. "Sit down, son," Mrs. Carmen said, pointing to a chair in front of her. "During my illness, the spirits showed me things you need to know." Ethan took a seat while the wolf settled beside him. The room seemed to vibrate with an ancient energy, as if the walls themselves contained secrets waiting to be revealed. "I saw the past and future intertwined," Mrs. Carmen began, her voice charged with power. "I saw how the sacred forest has protected these lands for generations, and how its destruction would bring an imbalance that would affect not only our town, but the entire world." The old woman rose with surprising agility and went to an ancient chest in the corner of the room. From it, she extracted a roll of yellowed paper, carefully wrapped in embroidered cloth. "This map," she explained as she unfolded it on the table, "has been passed down from healer to healer for generations. It shows the sacred places of the forest, the points where the earth's energy is strongest." Ethan leaned over the map, fascinated. The drawings showed an intricate network of lines connecting different points in the forest, forming patterns that seemed to pulse with life. "But there's more," Mrs. Carmen continued. "During my illness, the spirits revealed to me the existence of a sacred place that doesn't appear on the map. An ancient cave where our ancestors performed their most important rituals." "A sacred cave?" Ethan asked, feeling the wolf tense at the mention. "Yes, and it's right in the center of the area that Don Joseph and the developers plan to destroy. The spirits showed me that in that cave there's evidence of the historical and spiritual importance of these lands, evidence that not even the government could ignore." Rose, who had been listening in silence, intervened. "Is that why you fell ill, Grandma? The spirits wanted Ethan to discover his healing gift so they could reveal this to you?" Mrs. Carmen smiled wisely. "The ways of the spirits are mysterious, my child. My illness was both a test for Ethan and a means to receive these visions. The sacred forest is alive, and it finds ways to protect itself through those who are willing to listen." "Where is this cave?" Ethan asked, studying the map with renewed interest. "The map can't show you the way," Mrs. Carmen replied. "Only the wolf can guide you. The spirits showed me that it knows the path, for those of its kind have been guardians of that sacred place since time immemorial." Ethan looked at the wolf, which returned his gaze with an intensity that confirmed the old woman's words. Through their bond, he could feel a subtle pull, as if the animal was already sensing the direction they should take. "But you must be careful," Mrs. Carmen warned, her voice becoming graver. "Don Joseph and his allies suspect that something important is hidden in the forest. They've hired explorers to search for anything that might hinder their plans. The cave must be found by those who seek to protect, not destroy." Martha, who had arrived silently during the conversation, placed a hand on her grandson's shoulder. "Time is running short, Ethan. The spirits have prepared you for this moment. The healing you performed last night was just the beginning." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The jade and obsidian necklace seemed to warm against his skin, as if responding to the importance of the moment. The search for the sacred cave would not only be a test of his new abilities, but also a race against those who threatened to destroy the delicate balance of the ancestral forest. Dawn was barely beginning to tint the sky when Ethan and the wolf ventured into the forest. Martha had bid them farewell with an ancient blessing and a small pouch of sage, while Eleanor watched with a mixture of pride and concern. The morning mist enveloped the trees, creating mysterious shapes that seemed to dance among the shadows. "Guide me," Ethan whispered to the wolf, trusting in the special bond they shared. The animal moved forward decisively, as if following an invisible path marked by ancestral spirits. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Ethan noticed that the familiar sounds began to change. The birdsong took on a different tone, more ancient, as if the birds themselves were intoning sacred chants. The air became denser, filled with aromas he had never perceived before. "This place is different," he murmured to himself, feeling how the jade and obsidian necklace vibrated with growing energy. The wolf suddenly stopped, its ears alert. Through their connection, Ethan sensed the presence of others in the forest. They hid behind an ancient tree just as two men passed nearby, carrying exploration equipment. "Don Joseph said the cave must be in this area," one of them commented. "If we find something of archaeological value, we could use the findings to accelerate the project." Ethan held his breath until the men moved away. The wolf waited patiently, its golden eyes fixed on its human companion. When the danger passed, they continued on their way, but now with more caution. The path they followed became increasingly difficult to traverse. The plants seemed to move of their own accord, opening to let them pass while closing behind them, as if the forest itself wanted to protect their path. Suddenly, they arrived at a clearing that Ethan had never seen before. In the center, a circle of ancient stones emerged from the earth, like fingers pointing to the sky. The wolf sat at the edge of the circle, waiting. Ethan understood what he had to do. He took out the sage that Martha had given him and began the permission ritual he had learned. As the ancient words flowed from his lips, the air in the clearing changed. The stones seemed to vibrate with their own energy, and a soft luminescence began to emanate from the ground. "Show us the way," Ethan asked in the ancient language that now flowed naturally from his being. In response, a blue butterfly appeared, its flight creating patterns that seemed to weave a message in the air. The wolf immediately followed it, and Ethan understood that this was another sign from the spirits. The butterfly guided them through paths that seemed to appear and disappear, through places where the forest became increasingly ancient and mysterious. The trees here were centennial giants, their trunks covered with luminescent moss that glowed faintly in the twilight. Finally, they reached a rock wall covered with vines. The blue butterfly fluttered towards a barely visible opening among the vegetation and disappeared. The wolf approached the hidden entrance, its behavior indicating that they had reached their destination. Ethan felt the necklace vibrating more intensely than ever. Carefully, he parted the vines, revealing the entrance to a cave. Ancient symbols were carved into the rock around the opening, glowing faintly with an inner light when Ethan touched them. "The ancient guardians," he murmured, recognizing some of the symbols his grandmother had taught him. Before entering, Ethan performed another ritual, asking permission from the spirits of the place. The wolf remained at his side, its presence providing both protection and spiritual guidance. The interior of the cave was surprisingly luminous, illuminated by natural crystals that reflected light in a way that seemed supernatural. The walls were covered with cave paintings that told ancient stories, human figures performing rituals, sacred animals, and symbols of power that Ethan recognized from his lessons with Martha. In the center of the cave, a stone altar rose from the ground. On it, ancient ritual objects remained intact, ceremonial vessels, musical instruments carved from bone, and most importantly, a codex preserved in a carved stone box. "It's more than we expected to find," Ethan whispered to the wolf, which observed everything with solemn attention. As he examined the ancestral treasures, a distant sound alerted them. Voices and footsteps were approaching the cave entrance. The wolf tensed, preparing to protect the sacred place. Ethan knew they had to act quickly. The secrets of the sacred cave had to be preserved, but they also needed to be documented to legally protect the site. With his heart beating rapidly, he took out his phone to photograph the evidence, while his heightened senses remained alert to any intrusion. Time was running out, and the fate of the sacred forest hung by a thread. The voices were getting closer and closer, and Ethan knew that the moment of true trial had arrived. The voices were approaching the cave entrance as Ethan finished documenting the findings. The wolf remained alert, its golden eyes fixed on the entrance covered with vines. Through their bond, Ethan could feel the growing tension in the animal. "It must be around here," echoed the voice of one of the explorers. "The marks on the trees indicate—" Ethan quickly put away his phone and positioned himself next to the stone altar. The jade and obsidian necklace vibrated with an intensity he had never experienced before, as if the sacred place amplified its power. The vines moved and Don Joseph appeared at the entrance of the cave, followed by two explorers. Their eyes widened in amazement as they saw the interior illuminated by natural crystals and the ancestral paintings on the walls. "So this is where you were hiding," Don Joseph said, regaining his composure. "It seems you found something interesting." "This is a sacred place," Ethan responded with a firm voice. "You have no right to be here." The wolf emitted a soft growl of warning, but remained controlled, following Ethan's calm. "Right?" Don Joseph let out a dry laugh. "I have all the necessary permits to explore these lands, and now, thanks to you, we found something that will make the tourism project even more valuable. Imagine an authentic archaeological site as the main attraction." As he spoke, one of the explorers tried to approach the altar, but the wolf intervened, its eyes shining with an ancestral light. "You don't understand," Ethan said, feeling how the energy of the place flowed through him. "This site is not a tourist attraction. It's the spiritual heart of these lands, the point where worlds connect." As if to confirm his words, the crystals in the cave began to shine more intensely, and an inexplicable wind stirred the torches that the explorers had brought. "More superstitions," exclaimed Don Joseph, though Ethan noticed a hint of fear in his voice. "This is progress, Ethan. You can't stop it with old wives' tales and lighting tricks." "They're not tricks," a voice intervened from the entrance. Rose appeared, followed by Mrs. Carmen, who, despite her recent recovery, radiated an impressive strength. "The spirits guided us here," Mrs. Carmen continued, advancing towards the altar. "They knew this moment would come." The explorers instinctively backed away from the presence of the old healer. The air in the cave became denser, charged with an ancient energy that even Don Joseph couldn't ignore. "These paintings," Mrs. Carmen pointed out, "tell the story of our people, of our pact with the forest spirits. Each symbol, each image, is a testament to the wisdom you've tried to destroy." Ethan felt a deep connection to the place, as if the very walls of the cave resonated with his spirit. Through his bond with the wolf, he could perceive the ancestral presences that inhabited the site, invisible guardians who had waited for this moment. "The documents have been sent," Rose announced, holding her phone. "Cultural and environmental authorities have been notified. This site is now under federal protection." Don Joseph visibly paled. "You can't do this, the project, the investments." "It's already done," Ethan replied. "This place will be preserved, not just for its archaeological value, but for its spiritual importance to our people." The crystals in the cave pulsed with a more intense light, and a deep sound like an ancient chant seemed to emerge from the very walls. The wolf raised its head and emitted a howl that resonated with the energy of the place, creating a supernatural harmony. Don Joseph and the explorers retreated towards the entrance, visibly disturbed by the supernatural events they were witnessing. "This isn't over," Don Joseph threatened before hastily exiting the cave. "You're right," Ethan murmured. "It's only the beginning." Mrs. Carmen approached the altar and placed an offering of sage. "The spirits are pleased," she said with a smile. "You've passed the test, Ethan, but the real battle to protect these lands is just beginning." The wolf approached Ethan, pressing its head against his hand in a sign of support. Through their connection, he could feel that something fundamental had changed. The sacred cave wasn't just an archaeological discovery, it was a confirmation of his destiny, a living proof of the power that still resided in ancestral traditions. The days following the discovery of the sacred cave transformed Whispering Pines. The news spread quickly, and soon the small town was invaded by archaeologists, anthropologists, and government officials, all eager to document and study the important find. Ethan observed the events from the porch of Martha's house, the wolf faithfully by his side. The presence of so many outsiders unsettled him, but he knew it was necessary to ensure the legal protection of the site. "The forest is restless," Martha commented, weaving a new shawl with symbols similar to those found in the cave. "So many new energies disturb the balance." "I know," Ethan replied, stroking the wolf's fur. "But I also feel that it's part of a greater plan, as if the spirits had been waiting for this moment." Rose appeared on the path, carrying a local newspaper. "Look at this!" she exclaimed, spreading the paper on the table. "The tourism project has been officially suspended. The authorities have declared the entire area as protected cultural heritage." The news should have been cause for celebration, but Ethan sensed that something else was at stake. Through his connection with the wolf and the forest, he could feel an underlying tension, as if a storm was forming on the spiritual horizon. "Don Joseph hasn't been seen in days," Rose commented, sitting down with them. "Some say he's been making important calls in the neighboring town." "He's looking for another way," Mrs. Carmen said, arriving leaning on her cane, but with a renewed strength in her presence. "Men like him don't give up easily." The wolf suddenly raised its head, its ears alert. Ethan felt the same unease through their bond. Something was approaching, a change in the forest's energies that he couldn't ignore. "Grandma," Ethan called to Martha, "I think it's time to prepare more people. The traditions can't remain a secret if we want to protect them." Martha nodded, as if she had been expecting these words. "The spirits have been showing me the same in my dreams. It's time for the ancient knowledge to flow freely again." "But how?" Rose asked. "Many in the town still fear what they don't understand." "Through example," Ethan replied, remembering his own transformation. "We'll show them that ancestral wisdom and the modern world don't have to be in conflict. They can strengthen each other." As if the forest itself approved of his words, a soft breeze crossed the porch, bringing with it the aroma of sage and sacred herbs. The crystals that Ethan had brought from the cave, now placed on the family altar, shimmered faintly. "We'll begin tomorrow," Martha declared, "with the waxing moon. We'll invite the young people of the town to learn the ancient rituals of protection and healing. And I'll share what I've learned about connecting with animal spirits," Ethan added. The wolf moved closer to him, as if affirming its willingness to be part of this new phase. Mrs. Carmen took out a small bundle wrapped in embroidered cloth from her shawl. As she unwrapped it, she revealed several necklaces, similar to the one Ethan wore, though simpler. "I've been preparing them," she explained, "for those who are ready to receive the knowledge. The spirits showed me that new guardians would come." Ethan touched his own jade and obsidian necklace, feeling the energy pulsing in it. "Each person has a different gift to awaken," he said, understanding more deeply his role in these events. "Not everyone will have the same connection with the forest, but each will find their own way to protect the sacred." Rose took one of the necklaces with reverence. "My grandmother says that the ancient prophecies spoke of a time of awakening, when sacred knowledge would be honored again. And that time is now," Martha confirmed. "But it's also the moment of greatest danger. When the light shines brightest, the shadows grow deeper." The wolf emitted a soft growl of warning, and Ethan felt through their connection a disturbance in the forest's energy. Something was moving in the shadows, preparing for a final attempt to destroy what they were trying to protect. "We must be prepared," Ethan said, standing up. "The battle for the soul of the forest is just beginning, and we'll need all the help we can get." The sun was beginning to set over the mountains, tinting the sky with reddish and golden hues. In the forest, the ancient guardians watched and waited, knowing that the fate of their sacred lands would depend on how this new generation of protectors faced the challenges to come. Dawn found Ethan and the wolf in the sacred clearing, surrounded by a group of young people from the town. Rose was among them, along with 10 others who had responded to the call of the ancients. Martha and Mrs. Carmen supervised the scene, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope and solemnity. "The sacred forest," Ethan began, his voice resonating with an authority that had grown with each day since his transformation, "is not just a collection of trees and stones. It's a living being, a fabric of energies and spirits that have protected these lands since time immemorial. The wolf walked among the young people, observing them with its penetrating golden eyes, as if assessing their readiness to receive the ancestral knowledge. Some instinctively stepped back, others remained calm, and a few even seemed to feel an immediate connection with the animal. "Each of you," Ethan continued, "has been chosen by the spirits. You're not here by chance. In your hearts beats the blood of the ancient guardians." Martha stepped forward, holding the necklaces that Mrs. Carmen had prepared. "These talismans," she explained, "are more than mere ornaments. They are bridges between our world and that of the spirits. They will help you awaken the gifts that lie dormant within you." One by one, the young people approached to receive their necklaces. Ethan could feel how the forest's energy responded to each delivery, as if ancient pacts were being renewed. "Rose," Mrs. Carmen called, "you will be the first to show your gift." The young woman stepped forward, her necklace softly glowing under the dawn light. The wolf approached her, and for a moment, everyone could see a flash of light that seemed to connect them. "Animal spirits," Ethan explained, "are our first teachers. Each of you will develop a unique connection with the forest guardians." Over the next few hours, Ethan and the elders guided the young people through the first steps of their initiation. They taught them the basic protection rituals, the sacred words to be pronounced when entering the forest, and how to perceive the energies flowing through the earth. To everyone's surprise, each apprentice began to show signs of different gifts. Some could sense the approach of storms, others discovered a natural affinity with medicinal plants, and a few began to perceive the invisible presences inhabiting the forest. "Ancient knowledge awakens differently in each person," Martha explained. "Not all will be healers like Ethan. Not all will be able to communicate with animal spirits like Rose. But each gift is important. Each guardian has their role." As he observed the training, Ethan felt a disturbance in the forest's energy. The wolf also perceived it, turning eastward with alert ears. "Something's coming," Ethan murmured, sharing a significant look with his grandmother. "Yes," Martha replied quietly. "Don Joseph has been busy. His allies are preparing for a final attempt to take control of the forest." "Will we be ready?" Rose asked, who had approached upon sensing the tension. "We must be," Ethan responded. "The forest has been preparing us for this moment. Not just us, but a whole new generation of guardians." The training continued with greater intensity. Ethan shared his experiences of connecting with the forest, teaching the young people how to open their senses to nature's subtle signals. Martha and Mrs. Carmen transmitted ancestral knowledge about protection and healing rituals. As the sun reached its zenith, something extraordinary began to happen. The crystals they had brought from the sacred cave began to glow more intensely, and each of the apprentices' necklaces responded with its own light. "The forest recognizes them," Mrs. Carmen smiled. "The ancient guardians give their blessing to the new ones." Ethan felt a deep emotion, seeing how the knowledge he had received was beginning to multiply. Each new guardian represented hope for the preservation of traditions, a promise that ancestral wisdom would not be lost. "Remember," Ethan said as the training came to an end, "our power doesn't come from ourselves, but from our connection with the forest and its spirits. We are guardians, not owners, protectors, not conquerors." As the young people dispersed, carrying with them the first seeds of ancient knowledge, Ethan shared a significant look with the wolf. Through their bond, he could feel that a final test was approaching, a moment that would determine the future not only of the sacred forest, but of all the tradition they had sworn to protect. "Prepare yourselves," Martha warned the new guardians. "The full moon approaches, and with it, the battle for the soul of the forest will reach its decisive point." The night of the full moon arrived with supernatural intensity. The sacred forest seemed to vibrate with ancient energy. The crystals in the sacred cave glowed with their own light, and the air itself seemed charged with omens. Ethan, the wolf, and the new guardians were gathered in the ceremonial clearing, preparing for what they knew would be a decisive night. "They're on their way," Rose announced, returning from her patrol. "Don Joseph has gathered a large group. They're bringing heavy machinery and legal documents they claim to have obtained at the last minute." Ethan exchanged a look with the wolf, feeling through their bond the growing tension in the forest. The jade and obsidian necklaces of all the guardians glowed faintly under the moonlight, like terrestrial stars responding to an ancestral call. "It's no coincidence they've chosen this night," Martha said, her voice charged with ancient wisdom. "The full moon is when the veil between worlds is thinnest, when the spirits are closest." Mrs. Carmen, who had been meditating next to the stone circle, opened her eyes. "It's the moment the ancients predicted, the night when the balance between the old and the new will be put to the test." The sound of approaching vehicles broke the peace of the forest. Ethan could feel the disturbance in the natural energies, like ripples in a sacred pond. The new guardians took their positions around the clearing, each connected to their particular gift. Don Joseph appeared first, followed by a group of businessmen and workers with machinery. Their faces showed a mixture of determination and nervousness at the scene they encountered, the guardians forming a protective circle, their necklaces glowing in the darkness, and the silver wolf next to Ethan, its eyes reflecting the moonlight. "This ends tonight," Don Joseph declared, holding a bundle of documents. "We have all the necessary permits. Not even your archaeological site can stop us now." "You're wrong," Ethan replied with a calm that arose from his deep connection with the forest. "This place is protected by forces older than any human law." As if responding to his words, a supernatural breeze began to blow, rustling the leaves of the trees in patterns that seemed to weave ancient messages in the air. The crystals brought from the sacred cave pulsed with a more intense light. "Enough with the superstitions," Don Joseph shouted, signaling the machinery operators. "We'll start with this clearing." But when the workers tried to advance, something extraordinary happened. Each guardian began to glow with their own light, their gifts fully awakening under the full moon. Rose established a connection with the forest animals, which emerged from the darkness to form a living barrier. Other guardians channeled the earth's energy, making roots and vines come to life, intertwining to protect the sacred territory. Ethan felt the forest's power flowing through him with a force he had never experienced before. The wolf at his side emitted a howl that resonated with the very voice of the earth, a sound that seemed to awaken echoes in the distant mountains. "The ancients are with us," Martha declared, her voice blending with the forest's song. "This is a moment of decision, not just for the forest but for all present." The workers retreated, overwhelmed by the supernatural manifestations they were witnessing. Some dropped their tools and moved away, crossing themselves. Even the businessmen accompanying Don Joseph seemed to hesitate. "Don't you see?" Ethan said, addressing all present. "True progress isn't in destroying the old, but in finding balance. This forest, these traditions, are a bridge between past and future." A glow emerged from the sacred cave, visible even from the clearing. The ancestral symbols on the stones began to shine one by one, creating a pattern of light that spread throughout the forest. Don Joseph, faced with the inexplicable, dropped the documents he was holding. What's happening?" "The forest is showing its true power," Mrs. Carmen responded. "Not as a force of destruction, but of transformation." At that moment, something changed in the atmosphere. The light emanating from the guardians and the forest became softer, more welcoming. Ethan felt that the ancient spirits were transmitting a message of hope and renewal. "There's a place for everyone in the sacred balance," he said, extending a hand towards Don Joseph. "Even for those who were once adversaries, the forest doesn't reject, it transforms." The full moon reached its highest point in the sky, and its light seemed to merge with the forest's energy. Don Joseph, looking around with new eyes, stepped forward and, to everyone's surprise, took Ethan's hand. I remember," he murmured, his voice breaking. "My grandmother also knew the ancient ways. I had forgotten." The wolf approached Don Joseph, and for the first time, the man didn't step back. In his eyes was reflected the recognition of a long-buried truth. In the days and weeks that followed, Whispering Pines experienced a profound transformation. The tourism project was reimagined as a learning center for ancestral traditions, where ancient knowledge and modern wisdom could meet in harmony. Ethan, along with the new guardians, established programs to preserve and transmit the sacred teachings. The wolf continued to be his companion and guide, a living symbol of the bond between worlds. The sacred cave became a protected sanctuary, where initiates could connect with the wisdom of the ancients. And on full moon nights, the forest continued to sing its secrets to those who had learned to listen. The true miracle, Ethan reflected as he watched the sunset from his grandmother's porch, the wolf faithfully by his side, wasn't the transformation of the forest, but the transformation in our hearts. Martha, weaving a new shawl with the symbols of the new era that was beginning, smiled with satisfaction. The spirits always knew. Sometimes the longest way back home is the one that takes us deeper within ourselves. And so in the sacred mountains of Whispering Pines, ancient traditions and new guardians continued the eternal dance of balance, preserving the wisdom that connects all worlds, all times, all hearts that learn to listen to the eternal song of the sacred forest.